In this video, we're going to talk about creating Java server faces for our entities. Recall that in our NetBeans installation, the JEE version came with a sample database. And in the sample database, we have a micro market table. This micro market table has a zip code, a radius, area length, area width. In our project, we've created a micro market entity. This entity is mapped to the micro market table in the sample database. The micro market entity class has attributes for ID, zip code, radius, area length, area width, where the zip code is the ID. We've also created a session bean that we use to manage our entities. So recall that in the abstract facade, we have functionality to be able to create, edit, delete, find, which is basically find by ID, find all, and find range. So we're able to manage our micro market entities in the database using this facade. We overrode the create method to do some validations, and we also added an additional find method to be able to get a list of all of the micro market records that have a negative radius. Now what we want to do is bring this functionality up to the user using Java server faces so that the user has a web-based interface to manage these micro market records. So what we're going to do is we're going to right-click on our project and say New, Other, and we're going to specify Java server faces, and we're going to select Java server pages for an entity. And then we're going to select the micro market entity. It's very, very important to pay attention to the options on this dialog. First of all, NetBeans is going to create a session bean for us in other words, a micro market facade session bean to manage these entities. But we've already created one, so we don't want an additional one created. So what we're going to do is specify JSF package so that it doesn't override the one that we already have. The bundle's going to be micro market, and we want to make sure that we specify the prime faces framework. So the files that were just created by NetBeans are a micro market facade, the abstract facade, and the micro market controller. We already have our abstract facade in our project management package. So we're going to delete this. We're going to delete the facade it created because we already have our own that we custom wrote for our application. So we're going to delete this. And now we have to go into our controller and just make sure that it uses the micro market entity facade that is in our product management package. The web pages that were created by NetBeans is it created a create, an edit, a list, and a view XHTML for our entity class. And it also added a link in our index.xhtml so that we can access this list. So let's run it. So when we run the application, this is the list of micro-market records, and this is all what NetBeans created for us. So let's look at some of the information that was created for us by NetBeans. So let's look at the micro-market entity controller. Notice it's a managed bean, and this is the name of the managed bean. It has session scoped. It has an attribute of the micro-market entity facade. So, and it's annotated with EGB, which is saying, okay, I want to access a session bean, and this session bean is the micro-market entity facade, and this is what's going to allow the controller to manage the micro-market entities in the database. It also has a list of micro-market entities called items, and it's got a selected micro-market entity. So we want to be able to create, read, update, and delete micro-market entities in the database. So in order to create one, we'll have a button on our web interface for create. And it'll pop up a dialog box and it'll let us create an entity. So when I click on create button, it calls this prepare create, and it instantiates a new micro-market entity, and it returns that selected record. Once I've created one, and I click save, it says it was created successfully, and I can actually see the record that I just created in my list. When I click save, it calls this create method. This create method calls a persist method saying that the action is create. So if we look at this persist method, the action is create. And in this case, what NetBeans thinks we want to do is, if it's not a delete, call the edit. But because we've overridden our create method and we have some validation that we want to have performed, we're going to modify this to make sure it explicitly calls our create method. So what we want to do is, if we go back to this and it says our persist action is create, we want to go to the persist, and we're going to modify this to say if our persist action is equal to create, we're going to use our facade.create and pass in the selected. Else, So if it's create, we want to call our facades create method. Else, if it's not delete, we're going to call the edit. Otherwise, we're going to delete it. What this JSF utility is, it allows us to send messages to the user interface. The JSF utility manages our messages. So in this case, we send a success message. We put our persist in a try catch. So if there's any kind of an EJB exception, we can send a message to the user saying there was a problem. And the same thing with any other kind of exception. We can send an error message to the user using JSF util. So get items. So we have a list of items. So when we want to display a list of items, we have to have get items, which is our list of micro market entities. And basically all we're doing here is calling find all. So we can create, we can update, we can find all. NetBeans also created XML files for being able to list. So this is what the page that's displayed when we want to look at a list of our micro market entities. And it's a data table, and we've talked about data tables before, where we know that the micro market entity controller is the name of our controller here, and we know that items, it's calling get items, and we know get items is assigned to the results of calling find all, and we have a currently selected micro market entity. So selected is the current micro market entity. And then we just display each of those. So when we iterate through the data table, the bar is called item. So each micro market entity in our list of items is called item. So we have item zip code, item radius, item length, item width. And in our list, we can create, we can view, we can edit, we can delete. So we might notice that some of the labels in our system might not be as user-friendly as we might want them to be. For example, let's say we want to zip code differently. Maybe we don't want an uppercase C here. Maybe we want a space in area length. We want a space in area width. So we can make our labels look a lot nicer by accessing our micro market properties. So we can look at anywhere it says area length and area width. So we can go through this whole list of labels and we can make them just more user-friendly. So for example, anywhere it says I can look for them. And just go through, and whatever you see on your web pages and you want it to look nicer, you can. So these are the labels that are on the view. These are the labels that are on the list. Uh-oh. Let's do it clean and build. There we go. And notice where now I have a space and area length, I have a space and area width, and zip code. The isn't an uppercase KC. It just makes them a little more user-friendly. So if we want to create a new I put in a negative area length. Notice that we have a validation constraint in our entity that says that if we go back and look at our micromarket entity for area width and area length, we have that the minimum is 0, which means we don't accept negative values. And notice that this is the error message that we specify. So when I put in a negative value, area length cannot be less than 0. That's the message that we put in our validation constraint. And when everything goes well, I get a message saying everything was. Okay, the next thing I want to look at is the template. So notice if I go to my micromarket list, that it uses a template called our template XHTML. So it includes the template into this page. So if I go down and I look at that template, it uses Prime Face's layout, and it specifies what I can have at the north, and it defines a menu bar, and it specifies what is in the foot, and it inserts footer here, and we can insert a header at the top. So what we're going to do is in the north, or at the top of the page, we're going to include a header file. And at the south, we'll create a footer. So we can do new, other, web. We'll create an HTML file. We can call it header. And we can create another one. And call it footer. And you can put whatever you want in the header. I'm going to create a panel grid, and I'm going to just create a row and some columns just to space it out and make it look nice. And you could insert an image in your header or make it anything you would like it to look like. And in the footer.xml HTML file, I'm going to do something that's similar. Whatever you want in your footer page. And you can see the copyright down here, and you can see the header here. And you can make it look however you want it to look. The last thing I want to do is show you how you can apply a specific theme to your application. So Prime Faces provides a variety of themes that you can select from in order to easily customize your application. So you can specify any of these themes. So in order to add a themes to a Maven project, you need to add the repository and the dependency to your POM file. So if we go to our POM file, and you can specify here whatever theme you want. So we're adding the dependency. There we go. The Prime Faces theme dependency, and this one happens to be Glassfish, but you can pick any of these that you want. And then under repositories, we've got to add the Prime Faces repository. And then in our web XML, we want to specify what theme we want to use. So in our web XML file, one of our context parameters is going to be the theme that we're going to use. If you have a problem with have to do another clean and build. Here we see that the must be unique. I had, all right. Yes.
Yes, we're talking about the workshop. What time did you terminate?